My name's Ian Gilbert. I set up an organisation over 20 years ago called Independent Thinking, and I'm a curator of interesting educators, wonderful people doing really interesting things in education to support schools, to support teachers and school leaders to be brilliant. So the more I become aware of how the market permeates our life and how neoliberal thinking seems to be the only way of thinking that is accepted, and I came across that living and working in Chile, which is the home to this way of thinking. When it was foisted upon them in the 70s. And then the more I've seen that then in the education systems around the world, the more I've realised that people need to speak out against that. Because one of the things that it's doing is just making children and teachers deeply unhappy.
How many kids then do you see whose self-esteem has been absolutely smashed by an education system that won't bend to the needs of the child?
It's a huge thing. If you link self-esteem, which is sometimes hard to measure, but if you link it with mental well-being or emotional well-being, mental illness, number of kids on referral for those sorts of things, a number of referrals to CAMS, which is the mental health support system that the government runs.
And that's in Britain?
That CAMS is in Britain.
But I'm talking globally.
Globally, it's a huge issue. Front page of the, I live in Hong Kong, front page of the South China Morning Post a few months ago was, worst of the effect, over half of secondary students in Hong Kong showing symptoms of depression. In Japan, I know Japan's not sort of high on the list of the PISA ratings, but their 1st of September is National Suicide Day for young people in Japan because they go back to school and the bullying, they don't want to go. So the biggest killer of young 14 to 18-year-olds in Japan currently is suicide. It's an issue in Korea, it's an issue in across China, in Shanghai. I was getting reports of children at primary age trying to commit suicide or committing suicide. So if you look at some of those figures, and they are there if you look, but they're not, when people trumpet the PISA ratings, what they don't say is actually, it's this phrase, at what cost? Wherever you do something, you've always got to balance it with this at what cost. All right, so our results have gone up in the PISA ratings, no, but at what cost? What has been the downside? What has been the impact on human beings of working in this sort of way? So we push these big things like PISA, or it could be in a business, it could be sales or revenue, or we push these sort of market-driven objectives. But we don't ask that question at what cost, and and very often that's at the human cost.
Let's just carry on this bit of thinking, because if you then have that child that is depressed and not in the greatest physical shape, and then goes into the world, goes through university and then goes into the world, they go into the corporate world. Mm. The corporate world in many ways is still set up as you've called it, as a pat on the head culture, if you like. At the end of most corporate years, or probably some of them quarterly, you get a 360 review, and what they focus on heavily is all the stuff you're not very good at.
Right. Yeah.
Because so you're already diminished. You say, well, you've got to improve here, here, and here, and there's this never-ending treadmill, if you like, of self-improvement. Mm. But many of the times people don't really ever question what is the end goal here. Mm. And the end goal really, when it comes to a corporation, is to please shareholders and to return profits in, so to keep hold of people. Mm. So if you leave school, you go to university, then you go straight into a corporate, you haven't really ever had, or the pupil, student and then employee hasn't really ever had the space to develop socially, to be able to critically think about what is good for them and what isn't. Mm. What's your view?
Yeah, we get sucked into this treadmill, and debt is part of that process. Debt is part of the game that is created in order to hook people in. So we make credit easy. We get the credit cards are easy. The student debt is in there. So immediately there is no escape. There is only one way through the system, which is to pay off the debts, to feed the system, to keep your head down, keep your job, don't cause any trouble. You're sucking children into this system right from the start. It's about grades, it's about external rewards, it's about the next thing. So this idea that actually childhood shouldn't be just a training ground for adulthood, but that's how we're seeing it. What will they need when they're older? What are the skills that they need? What about just enjoying education for what it is? What about growth and development?
The commoditisation, if you like, or the commodification, I think is probably the better word, of education, is very much a byproduct of the current neoliberal mindset and economic system that we live under. You're not a fan, are you?
I just see, I think there's two sides to it. One is I see the damage done to children. Those who sort of survive it fairly unscathed and get their grades and come out, but they're still getting the educational lie, you know, oh, everything's going to be wonderful, you're being sold this, if you get these qualifications, you'll have this wonderful life.
And utopia.
Yeah, and whether that's in the UK, and then they suddenly realise, well, hang on, there aren't many jobs. There aren't, research came out recently. I think there are more graduates in non-graduate jobs at the moment than in graduate jobs. But then also you look at other places. There's a brilliant documentary called Schooling the World, where they focus on India and how the young men and women were leaving the rural villages because they were being sold, get an education, go to the city, make your fortune. And then they go to the city and there is no fortune to be had because it's all wrapped up. Same in China, same in Hong Kong.
When you say wrapped up, what do you mean?
If you're the right person with the right family, with the right backgrounds, you'll get those jobs. If not, you're just a very highly qualified taxi driver or bottle washer. So we're being sold this lie, the great educational lie, and that's you see that globally. I lived in Chile for a while. It's the same thing. Yes, we need education, but
Chile's was the testing ground for the neoliberal, horrific neoliberal experiment.
Yeah, the other 9/11, as Chomsky calls it. Yeah, and that's still. I lived there for a couple of years, not that long ago. My wife from Chile originally. She was born at the other end of town, the town that suffered from Pinochet.
The wrong end.
The wrong end. The town that suffered from Pinochet rather than benefited from Pinochet. It's still a divided country. You might lose a dictator, but his friends go on forever. They're still in place. They're still running the show. And he created he commoditized many things. But one of them was education. So you've got a 3-section education now. You've got the independent schools for the rich, for the elite. You've got these called subvention schools, which are privately owned but government funded, with a little bit of parent funding as well. So, and they're businesses. They're about making a profit. So if you can't afford to go there, you can't go there, and they'll put the prices up. And again, it's dubious quality, but you've got a closed market. And then you've got the state schools, which are of the worst quality. I was speaking to a lady there from the ministry, and she was saying, well, you know, hardly any of our English teachers know how to speak English, for example. But if you want to get out, to break the system, one of the things you need to do is to be able to speak English. So they're sort of trapped in this place where the school is not only a microcosm of society, the divided society, it also replicates that society and ensures that the society stays exactly where it is. And so you see that the independent sector in many places is really it's a sort of a mating area for the right sorts of people to get together and make sure they mix with the other right sorts of people.
And entrench a monopoly in many ways.
Yeah, status quo. I hadn't realised quite how powerful the status quo was until going to Chile and just realising there's so much effort goes into making sure nothing changes. And it looks like everybody's being really busy, but you're just reinforcing it in a variety of whole new ways, reinforcing everybody stay there and know your place. And you see it's the same in the UK, certainly in England. You know, the commoditisation and the academisation and free schools and all this sort of this new market-driven schooling. But ultimately, nothing's changed.
You and your argument could quite easily be, let's say, dismissed as anti-business. But actually what I see is you're pro-business, and I'll qualify it because IBM recently did a study where 1,900 CEOs were asked what were the 2 most important things for their leaders in the future. And the 2 things that came up all the time were creativity and adaptability. And then they said, what's your biggest challenge? And they said, war for talent. We can't find people at the top of our hierarchies with creativity and adaptability. And they said to all these CEOs, why? And many of them said, because we strip all that out of them by the time they get to the top.
Including in the school system? Do they mean?
Well, they were talking
specifically.
They were talking specific. No, not IBM. They were talking specifically to those CEOs about their organisation.
All right. So the organisation they
have stripped it out.
Okay.
But the argument really is, or it could be that's been stripped out way before, because these people have been grade A students. They've been top of their class. You know. And ironically, they point to people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all the rest of it. People who've dropped out of university, Zuckerberg being another one. Who haven't been subject to all that testing and haven't had all that stuff stripped out. The reason why I think your argument is pro-business is actually you're saying that's all the really good stuff, and that's the stuff you need to lead and to grow and to create value. And what's happened, from what I can see, is we've confused money and value.
Yeah. We chase the money, we don't chase the value. So I'm pro-business. I am a businessman. I run my own organisation. Run it for over 20 years. It's a small one, but it's a for-profit enterprise. So I'm up for that. But it's about doing it the right way for the right reasons with the value. So our company, we make a difference before we make a profit. That's the focus. So you have your moral compass. Is this the right thing to do? So I'm speaking yesterday to a load of head teachers from the independent sector in the UK, saying that we need to, that they're preparing the future leaders of the world, whether it's like political leaders, business leaders, whatever. They need to be preparing them in such a way that that morals and ethics and values are on the agenda. And that's not a thou shalt. That's not imposing our values and morals on them.
What is it?
Well, it's about them explore. It's about. So, for example, the work that I do with young people is around. It's sort of based on a thing called Philosophy for Children, which is a thinking skills program developed in America by a professor called Matthew Lipman, who realised undergraduates could reel off what Descartes thought but couldn't think for themselves. So he put this sort of thinking program together because he thought, well, we need children who can think reflectively, philosophically, deeply, to question. So I've been sort of working with and playing around with that for years now. And I use these little questions I call thunks, which is just the question where there's no answer. There's a yes, no, or a something else, and it's different for different people, but there's no answers in the back of the book.
What's the aim of a thunk?
A thunk is to get children to think. Is to get them to think beyond what's the answer.
Give me an example of a thunk.
So, for example, with regard to values and morals, it's like, is it right to bully a bully? Now, a 4-year-old can have a conversation about that, and a 44-year-old can have a conversation. It's the same thunk, but by doing that, you're starting to unpick this whole idea about rights and wrongs and values and morals, which is different from the Sunday school thou shalt, because things change. There are certain things that change over time. So just imposing our value system upon people isn't necessarily the right thing, but they do need a value system. So let's work and explore it and be part of what we're doing as schools. So when I'm working with the independent sector, I'm saying, are you sending out young people who, when they're in charge of the world, can make the decision based on, is this the right thing to do? Not, will this be the best for me, best for the shareholders, will this make the most of my, is this the right thing to be doing? So there's this moral conscience that needs to be superimposed on top of business decisions. And I don't say that from a Sunday school point of view. I say it because if not, we're going to be in trouble. Because it hasn't been, we are in trouble. So because we've, and certainly I think it's the case in the UK, but certainly in America, companies are legally held to account. Their legal responsibility is to maximise benefit for the shareholder. So by doing this, it's going to screw up the environment. You can't make that call, because then you're breaking the law, because the law says you have to maximise benefit for the shareholder.
But natural law doesn't say that.
Well, we're in trouble. I was speaking to one of our associates from my organisation, Independent Thinking, who's involved in things like the climate change talks, COP21 in Paris in November this year. He was also involved in the Pope's encyclical on climate change, which is, whatever your religious persuasion is, a document that we all should read. It's critical stuff that we're dealing with here. So these sorts of questions are the ones that we should be facing, but we're not. We're still, okay, what was who came after Henry V or whatever? We're learning about the kings and queens, but actually there are these, and climate change isn't on the educator's agenda, because in order for it to be on the agenda, bigger things have got to change, including the morality of business, including the decisions taken by business.
But is what you're also saying that if you do make a moral decision, or if you make a decision that is actually better for the nation as opposed to a small bunch of shareholders, profit will follow, or good business practice will follow? And in an era now of total transparency, consumers will vote with their feet and seek out those businesses, because we understand we're in some trouble.
Okay, so one thing is getting people to care, and sometimes people don't care, they don't care enough. And again, I'm blaming everything on the education system, but this idea about to do well in the education system, ultimately it's about what you do on your own in that exam room. So there isn't this sense of, I will succeed in school by what I give, by what I offer, by how I collaborate, by how I make things better.
It's about the individual.
It's about me. It's me sitting in that classroom, in that exam room.
And beating everyone else.
Yeah. Because you've got this dichotomy between, in England, where you've got the education minister saying, I want everybody to be above average. But then you've also got...
that's brilliant, right?
Yeah, it's Orwellian. So much of it is Orwellian. Everybody has to be above average, so everybody's... And then the other thing is that exams are, I think it's what's called norm referenced, which means that you will always have A to E in the exam. You can't have everybody passing because that's not how the exam is set up. So it's Orwellian the way that they're describing things. So the exam system is about me beating the others, so I'm top of that norm reference curve, not other people. So we play into that. So getting people to care, and this is where the independent and the international schools do better than the state schools, because service and service education is a big thing. You look at the International Baccalaureate, you have to do community action and service. You have to look at these things. It's a fraction of what your overall grade is, but you do have to do it. And I don't see the state sector in any country doing service.
Let's start talking about a more optimistic view. And I want to split Scandinavia in half. I want to talk about Sweden and Finland.
Yeah.
Because you've got, everybody looks at Scandinavia, certainly in Europe, and they just see it as this utopia, But the Swedish school system, in comparison to the Finnish school system, there's a marked difference, isn't there, between the two? Can you just...
The Swedish system bought into this whole neoliberal, we'll privatise the education system, private companies running schools, that will be better. They bought into that wholesale, and for a while it looked good from the outside.
How long?
I'm not sure exactly how many years, not that long, a few years. Michael Gove, when he was a Secretary of State for Education, one of the first things he did,
a British
politician and Secretary of State for Education in England, one of the first things he did was go to Sweden and say, this is a wonderful model, which indicated right from the outset that we are looking at for-profit, privately run state schools. They haven't gone that far yet, they've got close. But that was the message. But I've got a friend in Sweden who was feeding me all this information at the extent to which it was just the education, the quality of the education was nosediving in Sweden, where you would have a glossy prospectus, a glossy brochure full of, oh, look at all these computers we've got for it, look at our amazing dining facilities. But what the children got was, lessons based around a computer, not a teacher. So the quality of the teaching went down. The computers weren't up to scratch, and we know how computers can sort of outdate really, really quickly. So you might spend a lot of investment money buying a whole suite of top of the range computers, and within a year, they're rubbish. So there was that going on. The canteens weren't working properly, but the money was still, the inspectors were saying this is awful. You would get a school that failed an inspection that then had to be taken over by the government. So it's this idea about you privatise profit and you
socialise loss.
Socialise loss, yeah. So okay.
Where have we seen that before?
I wonder. Yeah, the system works brilliantly. Some of the the private schools were run basically by the hedge funds, by the bankers, who were then outsourcing the money into the Bahamas. I read, okay. So the money's being siphoned out through the system in the name of progress and standards into the private bank account, and then when the whole thing went badly wrong,
what happened then?
They just say, well, have your schools back.
So the taxpayer picks the school up.
Yep. So that's what's happened in Sweden the last couple of years. The government saying, okay, we'll have these schools back. Meanwhile, the Bahama bank accounts are overflowing.
Compare and contrast
with Finland, where they don't do that. It's about children starting school later on. It's not about testing them barely at all, I think, until they do the final sort of entrance exams, but there's hardly any testing. It's a lot more about connecting with the environment. It's a lot more about the people, about the self, about the well-being of the child. It's about levels of hope and optimism that permeate. High-quality teachers. So not only are they high-quality teachers, it's a highly sought-after post. So it's paid well enough.
But teachers are respected, and
teachers are respected.
But society really holds a teacher up in Finland as a really respected member of that society.
Yeah, which it used to be the case in other societies, and I think it can be at a local level. But the big thing in order to, again, the neoliberal model is to sort of denigrate, monetize, and run. So you come in, you look at something that's state, and you say, oh, it's awful, it's terrible, like the national health system or whatever it might be. It's awful. So you build at that, you get the media on your side, it's awful, teachers are terrible, kids are running wild, you make it really, the state can't do it, so we must, what's the answer? We must privatise. So you denigrate, you privatise, right? We'll get business running it, and we get academies. You get in the UK or in England, you get charter schools in the States. You get equivalent in other countries that are embracing this model, and then like we've seen in Sweden. All right, okay, well, maybe we're not making as much money as we thought. Thanks, so long, and thanks for all the fish. I'm going back to the Bahamas. So it's that sort of model that we're seeing, because ultimately these are they're businesses, so they need to make. We know that they need to make a profit.
And it's a captive market.
One of the reasons education globally is a $4 trillion business. $4 trillion business. So much of that is state money going into state education to employ state people, and businesses are saying, I want a part of that. We want some of that. That was the agenda that Gove came into this. The Tory party came into the UK with. Gove came into the. There's no coincidence that Rupert Murdoch and Gove had more breakfasts with Murdoch than any other UK minister when he was in charge of education. Gove's, when he was Secretary of State for Education, received the most in terms of private funding. You can give a donation to an MP to not to them individually, but to their constituency. He received the most. Murdoch has got an education division now based around America. This idea that you can we'll deprofessionalise teaching, we'll just make it about passing facts. We'll have control of the curriculum, predominantly white, middle class, middle-aged, male view of the world is what we will give to everybody, and then we will test you on that. And that testing will give us the data to tell us how good the children are, so we know where to shift them, and also how good the teachers are. Because teaching is just about the transmission of facts, and we measure that. Therefore, if the child gets 5 out of 10, you're a half as good a teacher as a child who gets 10 out of 10. Regarding all the other stuff that has an impact in the classroom when it comes to children's learning. And again, I say to teachers, if you're going to look at research in the classroom, and the whole research agenda, the what works agenda, is really about deprofessionalising teachers, because it's saying, we don't want you to think for yourself, just do what we say. It's Taylorism in the classroom. Don't think for yourself, just do what we experts have told you to do.
What do you mean Taylorism?
Taylorism, F.W. Taylor was, his view was, we don't need artisans, we don't need people to think for themselves in the factories, in the mines, in the steel works. We will, the clever people, the engineers, the people who've had a good university education, we will design the processes, and then all we need you, the workers, to do is just deliver these processes. By doing that, we will make everything more efficient, which will generate more income, which will go to us, might go to you.
Was he not the guy that said that money is the fundamental motivator?
I wouldn't be surprised, because it's what you see is time and time again is that government's saying, well, it's about money. So if we will give more money to the good teachers, or we will do performance-related pay. There is no evidence that I've come across in any sector that performance-related pay actually makes people perform any better. You give somebody a pay rise and they get a little bit of an up, and then it just sort of they flatline again. And teachers, and maybe in certain industries people aren't driven by money. My experience is that teachers, they want to be paid well enough for the work that they do, but money isn't the motivator. It's the other things. It's the interaction with the children. It's seeing children succeed. It's the softer stuff. Yes, passing exams, they like that, but it's
the stuff that can't be measured.
The stuff that can't be measured.
What happened to you then? Because we've done our research. You were a straight A student,
yeah.
Head boy,
yeah.
And you then decided, no, this isn't quite right. This isn't working. Yeah. What happened there? Because, dare I say it, that's quite renegade in spirit, to turn your back on a system and then shift allegiance to something else.
Yeah, I did a diploma, business diploma. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did a French degree at one of the top universities in the UK. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Was determined never to be a teacher. Did a business diploma. Seemed like a good idea. And this guy came talking to us over one weekend about what he called the psychology of success, which a lot of it was sort of the American motivational stuff from way back, really. And we were a bit dismissive to begin with, but it was thinking, why didn't anybody tell me this when I was 16?
And what was he telling you?
Well, he was talking about things like goal setting, that if you change your thoughts, that changes the outcomes in your life. Things like that your attitude will take you further than your qualifications, and things like there are different sorts of clever, different sorts of genius. And we just focus on the two of them really in order to succeed in the education system. And it was at that point the great educational lie came to me, that I'd been lied to, do well at school, get a good job, and it was more to that. And also what I realised the secret of my success was at school, which was to wait to be told what to do and do it well. That was the model.
You were good at that?
Yeah, you have to be. So I did that and then went through the education system to a very high level and came out, and suddenly, while I'm waiting in the workplace, waiting to be told what to do like a good boy, other people are out there doing it. A lot of them are a lot less qualified than I am. So what came into my head then was this idea about going back into schools and working with young people. That was the picture in my head. I could see myself going back into the school where I was at school, where I was head boy. It was a state school in the Midlands in England, and talking to them about this, because I wanted them to have that same road to Damascus sort of experience of, oh wow, there's more to it. So I was working on that, and then for various reasons things in my life changed, and I found myself living and working in a place like Chile, and suddenly dealing with poverty and inequity and the continuing repercussions of a violent coup, where family members of my wife were disappeared, were tortured, were murdered, and dealing with that, and I'd never come across that before, and realising that you can do something about it, that you can fight, you can stand up, you can say there is another way. And that education is a really powerful platform within which to do that, because you're working with young minds. Yeah, this is what I'm trying to say to teachers now. There's a bigger picture. There is another way. Because what we're getting is the message, and this research-based agenda that the governments are foisting upon us in the name of standards is about, this is the way, this is the only way. So they've hijacked all the Professor Hattie research on his sort of meta research on what makes for good teaching. And, oh yes, the teacher at the front, the teacher in the room, it's about that. And we're saying, okay, that might work, but at what cost? And also maybe there is another way of doing it that might have fewer downsides and might have more upsides. So you still get A stars. It's like, again, I said to this teacher yesterday, what are they, and he was a history teacher in an independent school, and his model was, I teach them the stuff. And I'm saying, well, maybe there's a different model, maybe there is other ways of doing it. And the question I put to him is, what are they learning while you're teaching them? And that made his head explode, he said. What are they learning while you're teaching them? Because if they're learning to sit down, sit still, play the game, do what they're told, be subservient, be subject to authority, not to interact, be better than the person next to you, not to collaborate, and get A grades, that's one thing, and that's going on in schools. All of those things I can point to schools in England where that model is happening. Or they're learning to collaborate, they're learning to be creative, they're learning to think for themselves, they're learning to find their own sources of information, they're learning to verify those sources of information, they're learning to use technology, they're learning to look at the overlap between the things that they're learning and other areas of the curriculum and life beyond the curriculum. They're doing all those things and they're getting their A grades.
As we wrap up, I want to...
I've just got started.
There are a lot of people watching this, and there'll be two reactions. The first is, I've been through school and I've been quite damaged by it. And a lot of that self-esteem hasn't come back. What would you say to those people?
It's never too late. Samuel Beckett, the playwright, said you can change your life with your dying breath. If you know that there's more to it than this, there's more to you than this. Your brain, and go back to the neuroscience, which is just, it's the brain stupid. Again, I say to teachers, it's not like the economy, it's the brain stupid. Anything you do is ultimately about what's going on between ears. If you understand this plasticity of the brain, which we retain, it's harder as we get older, but we retain through till death. So at any point, you can say, I reject that past. I reject this idea that this is as good as it gets. Hope, and it is, I wrote a book about motivation, and hope is one of these keys to having internally motivated learners. And hope means things can get better and I can do something about it. So if we have that sense of, and so we might have left hopeless with our hope taken away, this is as good as it gets. I'm not very good, therefore I'm never going to get a good job. But if you change that and understand that neurologically speaking, we can always make changes, we can always change things, we can instigate new habits and new ways of thinking. Back to the self-talk we talked about. I can talk to myself in different ways. So rather than saying, I could never do that, or I can't sing, I'm no good at maths, change that language, flip it around, and then go out and get an education. And some of the best educational establishments and environments are ones where adults are going back and finding out for themselves. So in the UK, you've got things like the Open University, but there are other ones around the world who are just saying, bearing in mind as well, back to the brain, neurologically speaking, we don't mature till somewhere between 20 and 25 years old. So to say to a child, well, that's at 16, you're an A-grade student, or you're not, we're talking to a work in progress. And just saying that to adults, you didn't mature, so you weren't ready for school. Fine, doesn't matter, go back and learn, do it now. And it's like the educating Rita sort of phenomenon, but it changes lives. So it's never too late, there is always hope.
Ian Gilbert, thank you. This is a Renegade Inc badge.
Right.
It's clear that you think differently, and people who do get one of these, it's quite Blue Peter-esque.
Yes, I shall wear it with pride.
This is for you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.